It was a cold evening in early spring when the story began, the kind of night that felt heavy and tired. The small town sat quietly under the soft orange glow of streetlights. Most people were at home, finishing dinner or watching television, while a few cars rolled lazily down the main road. The town wasn't the kind of place where much happened, and that was exactly how people liked it. Officer Daniel Morris had been working the late shift for years. He was in his mid-40s with a serious face that had grown tired from too many long nights. His job had changed him. When he first joined the police force, he believed in helping people, keeping the peace and doing the right thing. But after years of arguments, arrests, and bad calls, that belief had worn thin. That night, he sat in his patrol car near a quiet intersection, listening to the soft crackle of the radio. The dashboard light cast a pale glow on his face. He took a sip of lukewarm coffee and rubbed his eyes. He wasn't a bad man, but he had grown impatient, with his job, with the people he dealt with, and maybe even with himself. He had been through a rough few months. His marriage was on the edge. His teenage son hardly spoke to him anymore. At work, his captain had been warning him about his temper. "You need to keep calm, Morris," the captain had said during a meeting. "You're a good officer, but lately you've been letting things get to you." Daniel had nodded, pretending to listen, but deep down he felt misunderstood. Across town, a woman named Jessica Lane sat alone in a small diner. The clock above the counter showed 11:47 p.m. The diner was half empty, just a truck driver finishing his coffee and a waitress wiping down the tables. Jessica stared at her reflection in the window. Her eyes were tired, her makeup slightly smudged, and her jacket still smelled faintly of whiskey. It had been a long day. She had just lost her job at a small grocery store where she'd worked for nearly 2 years. Her manager had told her they were cutting back. The words echoed in her mind all night. To make things worse, her boyfriend had broken things off the week before. They'd been arguing a lot, about money, about trust, about everything. So that night she did what she sometimes did when life felt too heavy. She went to a bar after work. She hadn't planned to drink much, but one glass turned into two, and two turned into several. She didn't remember how long she'd been there. She only remembered the music, the noise, and the dull ache of trying to forget her problems. Now, sitting in the diner with a cup of coffee she couldn't finish, she felt dizzy and restless. She wanted to go home, but she had walked there from the bar, and her small apartment was still a few blocks away. The waitress noticed her rubbing her temples and asked gently, "You okay, honey?" Jessica nodded, forcing a small smile. "Yeah, just tired." When she finally left, the cold air hit her like a slap. The streets were empty. She wrapped her jacket tighter and started walking. Her heels clicked against the pavement, echoing softly in the quiet night. At the same time, Officer Morris received a call over the radio, a report of a possible drunk person wandering near Main Street close to the diner. He sighed, setting down his coffee. "I'll check it out," he said into the radio. As he drove toward the area, he didn't expect much. Calls like that were common. Usually it was someone walking home from the bar, maybe singing too loud or stumbling on the sidewalk. Most nights he'd just give them a warning and send them home safely. But that night something in him was already tense, worn out, on edge. When he spotted Jessica walking along the sidewalk, he slowed the car and turned on his headlights. She squinted, covering her eyes from the brightness. The cruiser pulled up beside her and the red and blue lights flashed softly. "Ma'am," he called through the open window, his voice firm. "Are you all right?" Jessica stopped, unsure how to answer. "I'm fine," she said, her voice slurred but polite. He stepped out of the car. "Have you been drinking tonight?" She looked away, embarrassed. "A little. Can you show me some ID?" he asked, trying to keep his tone neutral. She reached into her purse, fumbling for her wallet. Her hands were shaking slightly. He noticed, and his frustration grew. Not because of her, but because he'd dealt with so many similar calls that week. He was tired of the same stories, the same excuses. "All right," he said, glancing at her ID. "You live nearby?" "Yes," she said quietly. "Just a few blocks down." He sighed. "Okay, well, let's make sure you get home safe." "I don't want you walking around like this. Why don't you sit in the car and I'll drive you home?" Jessica hesitated. Something about his tone made her uneasy. "I can walk," she said softly. "It's late," he insisted. "Come on, it's cold." She didn't want to argue, so she nodded and got into the back seat. The car smelled faintly of coffee and old leather. She looked out the window as the car started moving. At first, they drove in silence. The roads were empty except for a few passing cars. She tried to stay calm, but something felt off. His voice earlier had been calm, but there was an edge beneath it, something sharp she couldn't quite place. "Rough night?" he asked suddenly. She nodded. Yeah, he didn't respond. For a while, the only sound was the hum of the engine. Then he said, "You know, people need to make better choices. You're lucky it was me who found you. Some other officers wouldn't have been so patient." Jessica looked down. "I didn't mean any harm," she said quietly. "I just wanted to go home." When they arrived near her building, he parked the car and got out. "Wait here," he said. He walked around to her side and opened the door. She stepped out slowly. "Thanks," she said, pulling her jacket tighter. But he didn't respond right away. He looked at her for a moment, his face unreadable. "You really shouldn't be out like this," he muttered. "I know," she said softly. He checked his radio, then hesitated. "You have anyone at home?" She shook her head. "No." That answer seemed to hang in the air. He nodded once, then said, "All right, go inside. Get some rest." She turned toward her building, relieved that it was over. But as she reached the door, she realized she didn't have her keys. She checked her pockets, then her purse. Her heart sank. She must have left them at the diner. "Everything okay?" he called out. She turned back. "I think I lost my keys," she said. He sighed, glancing at his watch. "You sure you don't have a spare somewhere?" "No." He looked tired, almost annoyed. "All right, get back in the car. I'll take you to the diner to check." She didn't want to, but she didn't see another option. They drove back in silence. The lights of the diner glowed dimly as they pulled up. It was almost midnight now, and the waitress was closing up. Jessica found her keys sitting on the counter, exactly where she had left them. As they headed back, she noticed the change in his mood. His voice had grown shorter, his jaw tight. She told herself it was just another long shift for him, nothing more. Still, she couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. When they reached her building again, he got out and walked her to the door. "You got it now?" he asked. She nodded. "Yes, thank you." He gave a small nod and turned to leave. She went inside and leaned against the wall, taking a deep breath. Her hands were trembling slightly, and she didn't know why. Maybe it was just the alcohol, maybe the stress of the night. Either way, she felt uneasy. Outside, Daniel got back in his car and sat for a moment, staring through the windshield. His thoughts were tangled. He told himself he'd done the right thing, made sure she was safe, followed protocol. But deep down, he knew his patience had worn dangerously thin. He drove off slowly, the sound of the tires fading into the quiet streets. The next morning, Jessica woke with a headache and a faint memory of the night before. She tried to piece it together. The bar, the diner, the police car, the flashing lights. It all felt distant, like a dream. She sighed and got up, making herself coffee. She didn't know it yet, but the events of that night would soon pull her into a storm she never expected. Across town, Daniel sat in the break room of the police station, sipping his coffee and staring at the wall. A younger officer was telling a story about a late-night chase, laughing loudly. Daniel didn't join in. He just kept thinking about the woman he'd given a ride to. He told himself it was nothing, just another night. But something about it kept nagging at him. Later that day, his captain called him into the office. "Got a call this morning," the captain said, frowning. "Someone filed a complaint. Says you stopped her last night and acted aggressive." Daniel's heart sank. "Aggressive? I'm not saying you did," the captain interrupted. "But I need you to write a full report. Be detailed." Daniel nodded slowly. Of course. When he left the office, his hands were shaking. He knew how these things went. Even if it wasn't true, even if it was a misunderstanding, complaints had a way of sticking to you. And his record wasn't spotless. A few past warnings for losing his temper on duty. He sat down at his desk and started writing. The words came out carefully. Responded to report of intoxicated woman. Ensured safety. No further issues. But he couldn't stop thinking about her face, the uncertainty in her eyes, the hesitation in her voice. Meanwhile, Jessica had gone to the police station that morning. She wasn't angry exactly. She just wanted to make sure the way she felt wasn't ignored. He wasn't violent, she told the officer at the front desk. Just rough in how he spoke. It made me uncomfortable. The officer nodded, taking notes. "We'll file this and have someone look into it." She almost regretted saying anything as soon as she left. Maybe she was overreacting. Maybe she'd imagined the tension. But part of her couldn't let it go. As the day went on, whispers started moving through the station. Some officers rolled their eyes. Another complaint, huh? While others stayed quiet. Daniel tried to ignore it, but the unease was growing. That night, as he sat alone in his car again, he thought about everything. His job, his family, his anger. The weight of it all pressed on him like never before. He didn't know that this was only the beginning, and that one small encounter on a quiet street would soon spiral into something much bigger. Something that would
change both of their lives forever. That night at the
station started like many others for Officer Daniel Morris. He had been on duty for almost 8 hours and was tired, hungry, and counting down the minutes to clock out. The call about a drunk woman outside a local bar came just when he was hoping for a quiet end to his shift. When he arrived, the flashing lights of the patrol car lit up the parking lot. A small crowd had gathered near the sidewalk, watching a woman who seemed too drunk to stand straight. Her name was Jessica Lane. She was loud, emotional, and clearly upset. She shouted at the crowd, telling everyone to mind their own business. Daniel stepped out of his car, trying to calm her down. At first, his voice was steady and professional. He asked for her ID, told her she needed to go home or he'd have to take her in for public intoxication. But Jessica wasn't listening. She was frustrated, crying, and kept saying that no one understood her. It wasn't the first time he'd dealt with someone drunk and upset, but something about that night felt heavier, tenser. After a few minutes, Jessica tripped over her own feet and landed near the curb. Daniel helped her up, but she pulled away, shouting for him not to touch her. A few people in the crowd started recording on their phones. That made Daniel nervous. He didn't like being filmed while working, especially when a situation could turn unpredictable. Eventually, he decided to place her under arrest for her own safety and to calm the scene. He told her she was being detained and guided her hands behind her back to put on the handcuffs. She didn't resist, but she kept talking, loudly, emotionally. As he walked her to the car, she stumbled again and he held her by the arm. When she sat in the back seat, she kept shouting from behind the divider. Her words were slurred and hard to understand, but her tone carried anger and sadness all mixed together. At the station, things didn't get easier. Jessica refused to quiet down, demanding to know why she was being treated like a criminal. Daniel was frustrated. He'd had a rough week, complaints piling up, stress from supervisors, long hours, and now this. He took a deep breath and tried to keep calm. Inside the booking area, another officer came by to help with paperwork. Daniel filled out the report, but Jessica kept interrupting. She said she hadn't done anything wrong. She said she just wanted to go home. Her voice cracked when she said she was scared. That was the moment something shifted. The situation no longer looked like a routine arrest. It looked like a person in distress. The other officer noticed too and suggested Daniel take a break. But Daniel insisted on finishing the process. Later, while Jessica waited in the holding room, she kept crying quietly to herself. A nearby camera caught her wiping tears from her face, still in handcuffs, still upset. It was a painful image, one that would later become part of a bigger story. After the paperwork was done, Daniel went to his locker to breathe for a moment. He felt angry, though he couldn't even explain why. Maybe it was the stress, maybe frustration, or maybe guilt for how the night had gone. In the days that followed, rumors started spreading around the department. Someone said there might be video from the scene outside the bar. Someone else mentioned that a bystander had uploaded footage online showing parts of the arrest. Daniel didn't think much of it at first, assuming it would blow over. But it didn't. Within a few days, the video had reached thousands of views. Local news stations picked it up. Reporters started calling the department for statements. The video didn't show anything violent, but it showed tension, emotion, and Jessica's fear. It raised questions. People wanted to know whether the officer handled the situation correctly. Jessica's family saw the video too. They were upset and said she had been mistreated. Her sister called the department asking why a woman who was already handcuffed had been treated so roughly. That phone call triggered an internal review. The department collected the dashcam footage and body camera recordings. Some of it matched Daniel's report. Some didn't. There were gaps, moments where the body camera had been turned off. That raised more questions. Jessica herself filed a complaint. She told investigators she had been scared and confused, that she didn't understand why the officer was so angry. She said she felt humiliated. She didn't accuse anyone directly but wanted someone to listen this time. The investigators went through every detail. They watched hours of footage, spoke to witnesses, and reviewed radio calls from that night. Every small inconsistency started to add up. When Daniel was called in for questioning, he sat stiffly across from the two investigators. They asked calm, simple questions. Why did he turn off his body camera? Why were there gaps in the recording? Why didn't he report that the suspect was distressed? He didn't have good answers. He said he didn't remember. The interview was long and quiet. Every now and then, he would take a sip of water and look down at the table. It wasn't just a job on the line. It was his reputation, his career, his sense of who he was. Jessica's statement came next. She described the night as terrifying. She said she felt trapped and powerless. But she also said she didn't hate Daniel. I just wanted someone to treat me like a human being, she told them softly. Those words stayed with the investigators long after the meeting ended. Days later, the department announced that the case would be sent to the district attorney's office for review. The community reacted with mixed feelings. Some supported the officer, saying he had done what he needed to. Others demanded accountability, saying the situation showed how easily power could be abused. Daniel tried to stay out of the spotlight, but his face was already on the news and reporters were outside his house asking for comments. He didn't answer. He barely spoke to anyone. Jessica, meanwhile, focused on healing. She stayed off social media and tried to rebuild her life. She talked to a counselor and started volunteering at a local shelter for women struggling with addiction. She said it helped her find peace. For the next several weeks, the investigation continued quietly. Evidence piled up, and the story became a symbol of something bigger, about fairness, restraint, and how small decisions can have lifelong consequences. The morning after the video appeared online, the small town's police department felt unusually quiet. Phones rang more than usual and people whispered in the hallways. Most officers had already seen the clip, a short, shaky video showing part of the night when Jessica Lane was arrested. It didn't show anything terrible, but it raised a lot of questions. Jessica looked scared and confused, and Officer Daniel Morris looked frustrated and impatient. That was enough to make people start talking. The department's chief called an early meeting. Everyone sat around the long table, coffee cups in front of them waiting for him to speak. He looked tired. "We've got a problem," he said, his voice low and calm. "There's a video online that's getting attention. I don't want to jump to conclusions, but we're opening a formal review." Nobody said anything for a moment. A few glanced at Daniel, who sat near the end of the table. He looked down, staring at his hands. He knew this wasn't just another small-town rumor. The video had been shared thousands of times overnight. People were already calling the station, asking what really happened that night. After the meeting, Daniel walked out slowly. The other officers avoided eye contact, unsure what to say. He went straight to his locker, grabbed his jacket, and left through the back door. When he got home, his wife was sitting on the couch, phone in hand. "They're talking about you on the news," she said quietly. He nodded, saying nothing. She asked if everything in the video was true, and he said, "It's not how it looks." But even he wasn't sure anymore. Meanwhile, Jessica was at her sister's house. She hadn't wanted to look at the video, but eventually curiosity took over. Seeing herself crying, handcuffed, and pleading in the parking lot made her stomach twist. She felt embarrassed and angry, but also relieved that people could finally see what happened that night. Her sister hugged her and said, "Maybe now someone will listen." Within days, internal affairs officers arrived to start an investigation. They collected every bit of footage they could find, from the dashcam, body cameras, and security cameras outside the bar. They also tracked down witnesses, including the person who had filmed the short video that started it all. One of the investigators, a calm and experienced man named Officer Reed, sat down with Jessica for her interview. He spoke gently, not rushing her. "Just tell me what you remember," he said. Jessica took a deep breath and started talking. She explained everything, from the moment she left the bar to the moment she sat in the patrol car. She didn't exaggerate or shout. She spoke softly, sometimes stopping to think. At the end, she said something that stayed in Reed's mind. "I didn't want to fight anyone. I just wanted to go home." Back at the station, Reed and his partner reviewed Daniel's report from that night. Some details matched what they saw in the video, but other things didn't line up. For instance, Daniel had written that Jessica had resisted multiple times and that he had to use firm control to get her into the car. But the footage didn't really show that. It showed a scared, confused woman who was too drunk to stand, not someone being violent. They called Daniel in for questioning. He looked tired, older somehow, like the past few days had aged him. Reed asked simple questions. Why did you turn off your camera? Why didn't you mention that in your report? Daniel hesitated before answering. The camera battery was low, he said, but they had already checked the device. The battery had been fine. The interview went on for nearly 2 hours. Daniel didn't raise his voice. He didn't argue. He just sounded defeated. When it ended, Reed thanked him for coming in and told him they'd be in touch. Daniel walked out slowly, his shoulders heavy. In the following weeks, more information surfaced. Several bystanders came forward saying they saw Jessica crying in the car and that she seemed scared, not aggressive. One woman who worked at the bar said she had tried to calm Jessica before the police came, and that Jessica wasn't violent, just heartbroken about something that had happened earlier that evening. The community's reaction was split. Some defended Daniel, saying he was a good cop who had made a mistake. Others were angry, saying that people in uniform should be held to higher standards. News channels picked up the story, and soon it wasn't just a local issue anymore. Daniel's family stopped going out in public for a while. His kids came home from school upset after hearing people talk about their father. He tried to stay strong, but inside he felt everything crumbling. He had worked for the department for over a decade. He'd helped people, saved lives, and mentored new recruits. But one night, one decision had undone all of that. Jessica, on the other hand, began to find her voice again. She started meeting with a counselor to talk about what had happened. The sessions helped her deal with the fear and shame she'd been carrying. One afternoon, she told her counselor, "I'm not angry anymore. I just want to make sure no one else feels powerless like that." The investigator's report took almost 2 months to complete. Every word had to be checked, every fact confirmed. When it was finally done, they submitted it to the district attorney. The conclusion was clear. Daniel's actions didn't match department policy. He had failed to follow procedure, and his report contained misleading details. When Daniel was called back to the station, he already knew what was coming. The chief met him privately. "I've known you a long time," the chief said quietly, "but we can't ignore what happened." "The evidence is there." Daniel nodded. "I understand," he replied. It was all he could say. He was placed on unpaid leave pending further action. The news spread quickly. That evening, reporters waited outside the police station. Cameras flashed. Microphones were pushed toward him, but he kept walking. "No comment," he said softly before getting into his car and driving away. Jessica saw the report on TV that night. She felt a mix of emotions, sadness, relief, and even guilt. She didn't want anyone to lose their job, but she also knew what she went through wasn't right. "Maybe this will make a difference," she whispered to herself. Over the next few weeks, lawyers got involved. The district attorney's office reviewed the case carefully. They looked at every frame of footage, every statement, every file. They knew that whatever decision they made would be closely watched by the public. At the same time, the town's people kept talking. In coffee shops, barbershops, and grocery stores, everyone had an opinion. Some said the officer had snapped under pressure. Others said he should have known better. Daniel spent his days in silence, staying home most of the time. He'd sit by the window, staring at the street, replaying that night in his head over and over. He told himself he hadn't meant to hurt anyone. But intention didn't matter anymore, perception did. The public saw something wrong, and now the law had to respond. Jessica kept her distance from the media. She didn't want attention or fame. She just wanted closure. One morning, she received a letter from the district attorney's office asking if she'd be willing to testify if the case went to trial. She sat quietly with the letter in her hands for a long time before answering yes. By early spring, the decision was made. The district attorney announced that Daniel Morris would face criminal charges for misconduct. The town was stunned. It was rare for one of their own officers to be charged. Some people were angry. Others felt justice was finally being served. When reporters asked Jessica for her reaction, she said, "I just hope everyone learns something from this." Her calmness surprised many. She didn't sound bitter or vengeful, just tired and ready to move on. Daniel's lawyer advised him not to speak to the media. He stayed out of sight, preparing quietly for what was to come. He knew the road ahead would be long and painful, not just for him but for everyone involved. For the investigators, the case became a reminder that accountability matters. For the community, it was a moment of reflection. People began to see how quickly trust can break, and how hard it is to rebuild. And for Jessica, it was the start of something new. She began volunteering at local community meetings, talking about empathy and understanding. She never mentioned names, never blamed anyone directly. She just shared her story, hoping it would make someone think twice before judging another person. As the case moved toward trial, both Daniel and Jessica found themselves at the center of a story neither of them wanted. One had lost his career, the other had lost her peace of mind. Yet both were now tied together by the same night. A night that showed how one moment of frustration could ripple far beyond what anyone expected. The courthouse was quiet that morning. Reporters gathered outside, holding cameras and microphones, waiting for something to happen. The wind was cold, and the gray sky made the building look even heavier than usual. Inside, the case everyone had been talking about for months was finally starting. Officer Daniel Morris sat beside his lawyer at the defense table. His uniform was gone, replaced by a plain suit and tie. He looked smaller somehow, more ordinary. The man who had once worn a badge now sat silently, eyes lowered, waiting for the judge to walk in. Across the room, Jessica Lane sat with her sister. Her hands were clasped together tightly. She didn't look angry anymore, just nervous. It had been months since that night, but the memory still followed her everywhere. She had tried to move on, but seeing Daniel again brought everything back. The courtroom filled slowly. Some people came out of curiosity, others to support one side or the other. A few police officers sat in the back, quiet and expressionless. The air was heavy with tension. When the judge entered, everyone stood. The trial had officially begun. The prosecutor started with an opening statement. His voice was calm, serious, and direct. "This case," he said, "is about accountability. It's about what happens when someone with authority forgets that their duty is to protect, not to harm." He spoke about the evidence, the reports, the recordings, the inconsistencies. He didn't raise his voice or try to dramatize it. He just told the story as it was. Daniel's lawyer followed with his own statement. He said Daniel had made mistakes, but he wasn't a bad man. He reminded the jury that police work is stressful, and that people make decisions in seconds that others later spend months analyzing. "He's human," the lawyer said softly. "He's not perfect, but he's not cruel either." Jessica watched quietly. She didn't hate Daniel. She had thought she would, but as the trial began, she realized she mostly felt sad. Sad for him, sad for herself, sad that everything had come to this. When Jessica was called to the stand, she took a deep breath before walking up. The courtroom was silent. Her voice trembled at first, but she found her rhythm as she spoke. She told them what she remembered from that night, not with anger but with honesty. She said she was scared, confused, and embarrassed. She said she had felt like she didn't matter. The prosecutor asked her questions gently, giving her space to think. When it was the defense's turn, Daniel's lawyer asked if she believed he meant to hurt her. Jessica paused before answering. "I don't know what he meant," she said quietly, "but I know how it made me feel." That answer hung in the air for a long moment. Later that day, several witnesses testified. A woman who had been outside the bar said she saw Jessica crying in the back of the police car. Another officer said Daniel had seemed tense that night more than usual. A man who had recorded part of the scene on his phone said he had uploaded the video because he thought something didn't look right. Each testimony painted a picture of that night from a different angle. The pieces started fitting together, showing not just what had happened, but how easily a small moment could turn into something life-changing. When it was Daniel's turn to speak, everyone watched closely. He stood slowly, his voice low but steady. "I made mistakes," he said. "I was tired, frustrated, and I handled things badly. But I never wanted to hurt anyone. I let my emotions control me when I should have been calm. I wish I could take it back." His lawyer placed a hand on his shoulder as he sat down. For a brief second, he looked at Jessica. She looked back, not with anger, but with quiet understanding. Over the next few days, the trial continued with evidence where video footage, reports, timelines. The prosecutor explained how the body camera had been turned off, how the report didn't match the recordings. The defense argued that the situation was chaotic, that Daniel acted under stress. Outside the courthouse, news vans stayed parked day and night. People online argued endlessly, some defending the officer, others demanding justice for Jessica. It became more than a local story. It became a symbol. Inside the courtroom, though, it was just two people facing the consequences of a night they both wished had gone differently. When closing arguments came, both sides spoke from the heart. The prosecutor said, "Justice is not about revenge. It's about responsibility." The defense said, "A single mistake should not erase a lifetime of service." The jury left to deliberate. Hours passed. People waited, pacing the hallways, checking their phones. Jessica sat quietly with her sister, barely speaking. Daniel stayed in the defense room with his lawyer, staring at the floor. When the jury finally returned, the courtroom filled again. Everyone stood as the foreman read the verdict. The words were short, but they echoed through the room. "Guilty." Daniel closed his eyes for a moment. His lawyer placed a hand on his back, whispering something no one else could hear. Jessica felt her heart drop. Even though she had known this might happen, hearing it made her emotional. She didn't smile or celebrate. She just sat there, tears quietly slipping down her face. The judge thanked the jury and then turned to Daniel. His tone was calm and respectful. "You served this community for many years," he said. "But authority is not a shield. It is a responsibility. When that responsibility is broken, the trust of the public is broken too." He paused for a moment before announcing the sentence. Daniel listened silently. The courtroom was still except for the sound of pens scratching on paper and a few quiet sobs from the back row. After the session ended, people began to leave slowly. Some shook their heads, others whispered to each other. Reporters rushed outside to deliver the news. Jessica stood near the door, unsure what to do next. Daniel was being led away by an officer. As he passed her, their eyes met once more. She nodded slightly as if to say she understood. He nodded back. No words were spoken. Outside, the sky had cleared and the afternoon sun was shining. Jessica stepped out of the courthouse and took a deep breath. She felt lighter, not because someone had been punished, but because the truth had finally been heard. In the following days, the story spread across the country. News outlets talked about police accountability, about training, about empathy. Commentators debated whether the sentence was fair. But for those who had lived it, the conversation was personal, not political. Daniel was taken to a correctional facility outside the county. He was quiet during intake, answering questions politely. He didn't argue or complain. He knew what he had done and he accepted it. At night, when the lights went out, he often thought about his career, the people he had helped, the good days, the sense of pride he once had. He thought about Jessica, too, and how one night had changed both of their lives forever. Jessica's life slowly began to return to normal. She started a new job, spent more time with family, and went on long walks to clear her mind. She still got nervous sometimes when she saw a police car, but she was learning to breathe through it. One evening, months later, she received a letter in the mail. It was from Daniel. The letter was simple. He didn't make excuses or ask for forgiveness. He just said he was sorry for what she went through and that he hoped she found peace. She read it twice, then folded it carefully and put it in a drawer. She didn't know how to respond, but she was grateful for the honesty. Time passed. The public moved on to other stories, other headlines, but in that small town, people still remembered. The case had left a mark, not just on the police department, but on everyone who had watched it unfold. New officers went through extra training, learning about emotional control and community trust. The chief often used Daniel's story as a reminder during meetings. "What we do in one moment," he would say, "can define everything." For Jessica, life continued quietly. She didn't seek fame or attention. She just tried to live peacefully, helping others when she could. Sometimes she spoke at local recovery centers, telling people that healing takes time, but it's possible. For Daniel, life behind bars was slow and reflective. He spent his days reading, working in the prison library, and thinking about the choices he'd made. He didn't talk much about his past, but everyone there knew who he was. Some respected him for taking responsibility. Others avoided him. And though their paths would never cross again, both of them carried a strange shared truth. that one night can change everything. And that accountability, though painful, can also bring peace.